The shove from my own son echoed louder than my body hitting the polished marble floor. There, humiliated in front of 30 guests who stared at me as if I were a selfish, crazy woman, while David screamed that I was a terrible mother for refusing to gift my $900,000 house to Jessica. "She deserves more than you, Mom. So much more than you," were his exact words before he pushed me. But what I did after I picked myself up off that floor changed everything forever. That morning, I had woken up at 5, my heart full of excitement. It was Jessica's 32nd birthday, and for the first time in the 4 years she had been married to my David, I was going to prove that I could be the perfect mother-in-law she deserved. The sweet aroma of the 3-layer chocolate cake flooded my kitchen as I whipped the meringue frosting into the perfect peaks my grandmother had taught me. My hands, marked by 67 years of hard work, trembled slightly with emotion as I decorated every detail. The cake had to be perfect, like everything else for this party. I had spent over $500 on gourmet ingredients, exotic flowers, and elegant decorations. Money I didn't really have, but Jessica was worth every penny. The golden morning light filtered through my kitchen windows, illuminating the tiles I had cleaned until they shone like diamonds. This house, my $900,000 refuge according to the latest appraisal, wasn't just brick and mortar. It was the sweat of 30 years working double shifts, the tears of a widow who raised her son alone, the dreams of a woman who built her castle stone by stone. Every piece of furniture had a story. The Italian leather sofa I bought when David graduated from college. The oak dining table I chose while imagining the family dinners we would have when he got married. The crystal chandeliers were my gift to myself the day I paid off the last mortgage payment. Everything had meaning. Everything had a soul. The phone interrupted my thoughts as I placed the fondant roses on the cake. "Eleanor, we'll be there at 2 o'clock sharp." Jessica's voice sounded different, more commanding than usual. "I expect you to have everything perfect. Today is a very special day for me." "Of course, sweetie. I've prepared all your favorite dishes and—" "Perfect. David and I have something very important to tell you today. Something about my future and what I truly deserve in this life." The line went dead. A strange chill ran down my spine, but I chalked it up to nerves, wanting everything to be perfect. Surely they were going to give me the news I had been waiting for, a grandchild. The thought filled me with a warmth that spread from my chest to my fingertips. I rushed to the bathroom to fix myself up for the 5th time that morning. The salmon-colored dress I had chosen was flattering, even if it couldn't hide the expression lines that told the story of a life dedicated to others. I applied a little more blush, wanting to look radiant for my daughter-in-law. The entire house breathed celebration. I had lit jasmine-scented candles in every room. Flowers from the garden decorated every surface, and I had even hired a woman to help serve. Everything had to be perfect for Jessica. I spent the next hour obsessively arranging every detail. The silver cutlery gleamed like mirrors on the mahogany table. The fine china was perfectly aligned, and I had folded the linen napkins into the shape of swans, just as my mother had taught me decades ago when she worked at the city's most elegant hotel. The menu I had prepared was worthy of a 5-star restaurant. Garlic shrimp, grilled salmon with mango salsa, quinoa salad with dried fruits, and of course, the 3-layer chocolate cake I had perfected over the years. Each dish was one of Jessica's favorites, memorized from our few intimate conversations. As I checked the oven temperature for the 10th time, I remembered the words David had said to me last week. "Mom, Jessica always says how lucky she feels to have you as a mother-in-law. She says she's never met someone so generous and caring." Those words had fed my soul for days. At precisely 2 o'clock, the engine of David's BMW roared in my driveway. My heart began to race as I walked to the front door, smoothing my dress one last time. I had dreamed of this moment for weeks, imagining the surprise in Jessica's eyes when she saw everything I had prepared for her. I opened the door with my most sincere smile, but what I saw deeply unsettled me. Jessica was wearing a blood-red dress I had never seen, gold jewelry that shone like little suns, and a designer handbag that cost more than my monthly retirement check. Her eyes scanned my house as if she were an appraiser evaluating a property. "Happy birthday, my beautiful girl," I said, opening my arms to welcome her. The hug she returned was as cold as ice in January. Her arms wrapped around me mechanically as she whispered in my ear with a voice I didn't recognize. "Thank you, Eleanor. I hope you're ready to hear what I have to say. Today, some things are going to change for good." David appeared behind her, carrying a bottle of expensive champagne and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. My son, my only son, the man I had raised with so much love and sacrifice, greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that felt like a farewell. "Mom, the house looks incredible," he said, his eyes also scanning every corner with a look I couldn't decipher. "Jessica and I have a lot to celebrate today." The first guests began to arrive at 3 in the afternoon, and I was floating with happiness, watching everyone praise my home's decor. I had invited David's colleagues, some of Jessica's friends I barely knew, and my closest neighbors. I wanted it to be a memorable celebration, worthy of my daughter-in-law. "Eleanor, everything is spectacular," Mrs. Peterson told me as she admired the arrangement of white orchids on the centerpiece. "You can tell you've put your heart into every detail." I smiled with pride as I served the garlic shrimp on small porcelain plates. Every positive comment fueled my hope that Jessica would finally see me as the mother-in-law she had always dreamed of having. But something strange began to happen as the afternoon wore on. Jessica acted like the perfect hostess, receiving compliments and gifts with a radiant smile. But every time someone praised me for organizing the party, she would subtly interrupt the conversation. When Mrs. Gonzalez complimented me on the grilled salmon, Jessica immediately started talking about her new job at a real estate firm. When my neighbor George praised the floral arrangements, she changed the subject to her remodeling plans. At first, I thought they were coincidences, the natural nerves of being the center of attention. But when my good friend Louise said in front of everyone, "Eleanor, you are an exceptional hostess. This house is a true palace," Jessica let out a strange little laugh and replied, "Yes, it's a shame some people cling so tightly to material things when they could be more generous with their family." The comment landed like a stone in my stomach, but I tried to ignore it. Maybe I had misinterpreted her words. Maybe I was being too sensitive. I retreated to the kitchen to bring out the cake, hoping that the singing of "Happy Birthday" would ease the tension I was beginning to feel in the air. As I lit the 32 candles, I heard snippets of conversation from the living room. Jessica was talking to her friends about selfish women who don't know how to share and possessive mothers-in-law who don't understand the sacrifices young wives make. Each word was like a needle piercing my chest, but I convinced myself she wasn't talking about me. I brought the cake into the living room, my hands trembling slightly. Everyone applauded and began to sing. Jessica smiled radiantly as I held the cake in front of her, waiting for that magical moment when she would blow out the candles and make a wish. But when the song ended, instead of blowing out the candles, Jessica took my hand tightly and said loudly for everyone to hear, "Before I make my wish, I want to thank Eleanor for this beautiful party." Though I must admit, I'm surprised by all this generosity coming from someone who is usually so reserved with her things. An awkward silence filled the room. Some guests exchanged confused glances as I tried to process what I had just heard. Reserved with my things? I, who had given her jewelry for her last birthday. I, who always brought dishes of food to her house. I, who had paid for half of their honeymoon when they had financial troubles. "I don't understand, sweetie," I managed to whisper, feeling all eyes on me. Jessica let go of my hand and smiled with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, it's nothing bad, Eleanor. It's just that some people of your generation tend to be very attached to material possessions. My mom always says that true generosity comes from giving without expecting anything in return." The comparison to her mother was like a slap in the face. Her mother, who lived in a rented apartment and had never been able to give a tenth of what I had given my family. Her mother, who had only appeared in their lives after David got a good job. Her mother, who always found a way to indirectly criticize everything I did. "Jessica is right," David intervened suddenly, appearing at my side with a glass of champagne in his hand. "Mom, sometimes you give the impression that material things are more important than people." My world tilted. My own son, the man I had raised with so much love, was backing up his wife's hurtful words in front of all our guests. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, and my hands began to shake uncontrollably. I have always given everything for you," I murmured, feeling my voice crack. Of course you have, Mom, David said with a condescending smile I had never seen on him before. But giving and sharing are different things. Sharing requires real detachment, not just loans or occasional gifts. The guests began to murmur among themselves, some clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. I felt like I was in a nightmare, as if these two people I loved more than my own life had become cruel strangers. "Come on, blow out the candles," someone said from the back, trying to ease the tension. Jessica finally blew out the candles, but before I could react, she leaned into my ear and whispered so softly that only I could hear, "I already know my wish, Eleanor, and you're going to help me make it come true." The conversation that followed the candles changed the course of the entire evening. As I cut the cake with trembling hands, Jessica began to tell anecdotes about young couples struggling to become independent and the importance of older generations understanding when it's time to pass the torch. Every word was like a poisoned dart aimed directly at my heart. "It's incredible how some mothers-in-law become so possessive of their sons," commented one of her friends, a blonde woman I had never seen before. My sister-in-law had to set very clear boundaries with her mother-in-law to have peace in her marriage. Jessica nodded emphatically, looking at me meaningfully. "Exactly, Anna. There are women who confuse maternal love with control. They don't understand that clinging so tightly to things and people only create suffering." I felt as if I had been publicly slapped. There I was, the woman who had sacrificed everything for her son, being described as controlling and possessive in front of people I barely knew. My hands trembled so much I almost dropped the cake knife. "I have never controlled David," I managed to whisper, feeling my voice break. "Of course you have, Mom," David intervened with that new, condescending smile that made my blood run cold. "But there are subtle forms of control that we sometimes don't even realize we're exercising." The entire room watched me as if I were a specimen in a lab. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others frankly curious about the drama unfolding before their eyes. I felt naked, exposed, humiliated in my own home in front of people I had invited with so much affection. For example, Jessica continued as she accepted a piece of my cake with feigned gratitude. "When an older person clings so tightly to a large house, knowing that there are young couples who really need stability and space to grow." The comment landed like a bomb in the middle of the room. Now I understood where this whole orchestrated conversation was heading. It wasn't about control or possessiveness. It was about my house. My beautiful $900,000 house that I had built with sweat and tears over 30 years. "This house is very big for one person," the blonde friend added, looking around with feigned admiration. "It must be very expensive to maintain, too." "Oh, yes," Jessica sighed dramatically. "David and I live in such a small apartment we can barely fit. We've been saving for our own house, but you know how real estate prices are these days." My heart began to beat so loudly I was afraid everyone could hear it. Slowly, like pieces of a macabre puzzle, I began to understand what was happening. This was not a birthday party. It was a carefully planned ambush. "Mom." David approached me with an expression that was meant to be loving, but which I could now clearly see as manipulative. "Jessica and I have been talking about our family's future." "What future?" I asked in a thread of a voice, though I already feared the answer. "Well," Jessica took the floor with a smile I could now see in all its falsity, "we thought it would be wonderful if we could live here with you. This house is perfect for a growing family." "Live with me?" I repeated, feeling as if I were in an alternate dimension. "Not exactly," David interjected quickly. "What Jessica means is that maybe it's time for you to consider moving into something smaller and more comfortable for your age, and we could take over the house." The world stopped around me. The guests' voices became a distant murmur, as if I were underwater. My own son was asking me to leave my home, the place where I had built all my memories, where I had raised my family, where I planned to grow old with dignity. But this is my house," I murmured, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. "Of course it's your house, Mom," David said in that patronizing voice he used when he thought I didn't understand something. "But think about it logically. You don't need this much space anymore, and we really do. Besides," Jessica added with a venomous smile, "it would be such a beautiful way to show how much you love your son. Imagine what a wonderful gift it would be for our new stage as a family." I looked around the room and saw the faces of the guests. Some looked horrified by what they were witnessing. Others were clearly enjoying the drama. But what hurt the most was seeing that no one, absolutely no one, came to my defense. "I need some air," I managed to say, feeling the walls of my own living room closing in on me. "Mom, don't be dramatic," David said with irritation. "We're just talking about future possibilities." But I couldn't listen anymore. The sound of my heart breaking drowned out all other voices. I ran toward the kitchen, stumbling slightly on my own feet, as I heard Jessica say to the guests, "Please excuse Eleanor." Sometimes women her age get very emotional about these things. The laughter that followed her comment was the straw that broke the camel's back. I took refuge in my kitchen with a shattered heart, my hands trembling as I clung to the marble sink I had chosen so carefully 5 years ago. The guests' laughter reached me from the living room like daggers, and among them I heard Jessica's voice explaining my emotional episode with that fake sweetness I now recognized perfectly. "Poor Eleanor," I heard her say. "Sometimes older women cling so tightly to material things that they forget what really matters. Family." I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, but each inhalation felt like broken glass in my lungs. 30 years paying a mortgage, 30 years working double shifts at the hospital, 30 years dreaming of the day I could finally rest in my own home, and now my own son wanted to snatch it from me to give to his wife. The sound of approaching footsteps made me lift my head. It was David, with that look of false concern he had perfected over the past few months. "Mom, are you okay? The guests are asking about you." "How could you do this to me, David?" I asked, my voice broken. "How could you ask me to leave my home?" He sighed, as if I were the one being irrational. "Mom, nobody is asking you to leave anything. We're just suggesting a natural transition. You could move into a comfortable apartment without the responsibilities of maintaining such a large house." "An apartment?" I repeated, feeling anger begin to mix with my pain. "After everything I've worked for to have this house?" "Look, Mom." His voice grew harder, more like Jessica's. "Jessica and I are young. We have our whole lives ahead of us. We need space to grow as a family. You've already had your time in a big house." His words hit me like hammer blows. "Already had my time?" My voice rose an octave. "Does being retired mean I no longer deserve a decent home?" "Don't say that. You're twisting my words." David moved closer, and for the first time in my life, his presence didn't comfort me. "Just think about how happy you'd be, knowing you gave your son the chance to be successful." At that moment, Jessica appeared in the kitchen doorway with that hyena-like smile I had learned to recognize. "Eleanor, dear, the guests are wondering where the hostess is," she said in a syrupy voice that turned my stomach. "It would be a shame for your own birthday to be ruined by such a simple conversation." "It's not my birthday," I muttered. "It's yours." "Exactly." She approached like a predator stalking its prey. "And as a birthday present, I would love for you to consider our proposal. It would be so generous of you." "Generous?" The word came out of my mouth like poison. "Giving away my house is generous?" Well, Jessica exchanged a conspiratorial look with David. "Technically, it wouldn't be giving it away. We could work out a legal arrangement where you retain certain rights, but we would take over the responsibilities." My blood ran cold. They had thought of everything. This wasn't a spontaneous conversation. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to strip me of my assets. "You've already spoken to lawyers." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. David had the decency to look slightly ashamed. "We've only consulted on some legal options, Mom, to protect everyone's interests." "My interests?" I felt the rage begin to overcome the pain. Which of my interests are protected if I end up homeless? "Eleanor, don't be so dramatic." Jessica placed her hand on my shoulder, and her touch burned like acid. "No one is going to leave you homeless. We could get you a beautiful apartment downtown." "Get me? With what money? With my retirement pension that barely covers my basic expenses?" "Well," Jessica's smile became even more sinister. "Part of this house's value could be used to secure your future. It would be like an investment." There it was, the naked, cruel truth. They wanted my house, and they were willing to leave me with crumbs to get it. My own son had conspired with his wife to strip me of everything I had built. "Get out of my house," I whispered. "What?" David seemed genuinely surprised. I said, Get out of my house. Now. Mom, you're being irrational. David raised his voice. We have guests outside. Can't you just? I don't care about the guests. I shouted with a strength I didn't know I still had. I want you to leave my house immediately. Jessica and David exchanged another look, and in their eyes, I saw something that terrified me. Determination. They weren't going to give up so easily. All right, Mom, David said in a dangerously calm voice. If that's your final decision, I'll have to take measures. What measures? I asked, though I feared the answer. Measures to protect my family's future, he said, taking Jessica's hand. Even if that means protecting you from yourself. What followed was the greatest humiliation of my life. David took Jessica's hand, and they returned to the living room where all the guests were waiting, leaving me alone in my kitchen with a heart torn to pieces. I heard their voices gradually rise, and when I finally gathered the courage to go out, I was met with a scene I will never forget. Mom has decided to be incredibly selfish today. David was telling the guests in a voice feigning sadness but dripping with venom. We've asked her for a very simple favor, a show of love for her only daughter-in-law, and she has flatly refused. The guests looked at me as I appeared in the living room doorway, their faces a mixture of discomfort and judgment. Jessica was sitting on my Italian leather sofa, fake tears rolling down her cheeks while her friends consoled her. Poor Jessica, the blonde woman murmured. It must be so hard to have such an unsupportive mother-in-law. I've never had a problem with my mother-in-law, another guest added. But of course, she has always been very generous with us. Every comment was like a slap. These people, who had eaten my food, enjoyed my hospitality, now judged me without knowing the full story. I approached slowly, feeling as if I were walking to my own execution. Eleanor, my neighbor George, approached with a confused expression. Is it true that you don't want to help David and Jessica with their housing situation? Before I could answer, David stood up dramatically. Mom lives alone in this huge $900,000 house, while my wife and I are crammed into a tiny apartment. We've asked her to consider a transition that would benefit all of us, but she refuses. It's not a transition, I managed to say, my voice trembling. You're asking me to give you my house. That's not true. Jessica jumped up from the sofa with more tears, this time more convincing. We just wanted you to consider sharing this space with your family. But you prefer cold walls to the company of the people who love you. The murmur of disapproval from the guests grew louder. I felt the floor move beneath my feet. These two people had turned my generosity into selfishness, my home into a whim, my motherly love into toxic possessiveness. David, my voice was barely a whisper. This house is everything I have. It's my security, my future, my memories. And we are your family, he shouted, approaching me with eyes blazing with anger. Jessica is your daughter-in-law. She deserves to have a dignified life. She deserves more than you. The phrase echoed in the room like thunder. She deserves more than you. The words that had been dancing around the entire conversation had finally been spoken with crystal clarity. More than me? I repeated, feeling something definitively break inside me. Yes, David was out of control now. All his pretense of kindness had vanished. She's young, she has her whole life ahead of her. She can do something productive with this property. You're just wasting it. David, please. Jessica pretended to try to calm him, but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. This was exactly what she had planned. No, Jessica. It's time for Mom to hear the truth, he continued shouting as he moved closer to me. You've been selfish your whole life, always thinking only of yourself. You've never considered what's best for the family. I raised you alone, I whispered, feeling the tears begin to fall. I worked 2 jobs to give you everything. I sacrificed my youth, my dreams, everything for you. And now it's time for you to pay back that sacrifice, he roared. Jessica deserves to have the life I could never give you. She deserves more than a selfish old woman clinging to material things. The guests watched in horror as my son emotionally destroyed me in front of everyone. But the worst was yet to come. Mom! His voice became dangerously calm. If you don't sign the papers to transfer this property voluntarily, I'll have to find other, legal, alternatives. What alternatives? I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. Jessica approached with a triumphant smile. We've consulted with lawyers who specialize in cases of elderly adults who cannot make rational decisions about their assets. The air was sucked from my lungs. Are you threatening to have me declared incompetent? Only if you force us to, David crossed his arms. But it would be much easier if you just agreed to do the right thing. The right thing? My voice rose to a scream. The right thing is to steal the house from a 67-year-old woman? You don't need this house. David completely lost his temper. Jessica needs it more. She deserves more than you. And then it happened. I approached him, my own son, with tears streaming down my cheeks, and I screamed with all the strength I had left. This is my house. I bought it with my own work. I am not giving it to anyone. David looked at me with pure contempt, raised his hand, and pushed me with such force that I fell to the marble floor in front of all the guests. The silence that followed was deafening. From the cold floor of my own living room, looking up at my son who had pushed me, I felt something fundamental break within my soul. The physical pain of the fall was nothing compared to the agony of seeing the 30 people I had invited into my home, watching me as if I were a crushed insect. No one moved to help me. No one said a word in my defense. "Look what you made me do," David shouted, pointing a finger at me as I tried to get up. "This is your fault for being so stubborn and selfish." Jessica covered her mouth with both hands, feigning horror. But through her fingers, I could see a smile of satisfaction. This was exactly what she had orchestrated. She wanted me to look humiliated, defeated, vulnerable in front of witnesses. "David, you shouldn't have," my neighbor George muttered, but his voice sounded more concerned about the scene than my well-being. "She asked for it," my son roared, completely out of control. We offered her a dignified solution, and she chose to act like a victim. I managed to get to my feet, my legs trembling, feeling all the eyes in the room judging me. My salmon-colored dress was wrinkled, my hair disheveled, and I could feel a bruise forming on my right hip. But what hurt the most was the look of contempt from my own son. "I think you should all leave," I managed to whisper, addressing the guests who seemed paralyzed by the tension. "Excellent idea," Jessica said in her syrupy voice, approaching me with that false concern I now recognized perfectly. "Eleanor needs some time to reflect on her priorities." The guests began to move slowly toward the door, some murmuring among themselves, others simply escaping the discomfort. I heard snippets of conversation. "Poor Jessica, what a difficult situation. Older women sometimes become very stubborn. No one said goodbye to me. No one asked if I was okay. 30 people left my house without a single word of support or comfort. It was as if I had ceased to exist as a human being and had become the selfish obstacle Jessica had painted me to be. When everyone had finally left, only the 3 of us remained in my living room. The silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock that had belonged to my mother. "Mom," David spoke in a tired voice, as if he were the one who had suffered all afternoon. "You can still make the right decision. We can fix this in a civilized way." I looked into his eyes, those eyes that had been my greatest pride when he was a child, and I saw a stranger, a man who had inherited my blood, but not my heart, a man capable of pushing his own mother for money. "Out," I whispered. "What?" he asked as if he hadn't heard clearly. "Out of my house!" I screamed with a force I didn't know I still possessed. "Both of you, out!" Jessica approached with that venomous smile she had perfected. "Eleanor, you're upset. Maybe you should rest, and tomorrow we can." "There is no tomorrow," I roared, feeling the rage finally overcome the pain. "I never want to see either of you again in my life." "Mom, you're being hysterical." David approached again, and for a moment I feared he would push me again. "Tomorrow, when you've calmed down, we'll talk more calmly." "There's nothing to talk about." My voice had become icy, controlled, dangerous. "You have shown exactly who you are. Now leave." Jessica took David's hand and murmured something in his ear. He nodded and looked at me with an expression I will never forget. Contempt mixed with determination. "All right, Mom. We'll give you time to reconsider. But this isn't over. We're going to fight for what's fair, for what Jessica deserves. And if we have to use other methods to protect our interests," Jessica added in a sweet but threatening voice, "we will. There are many ways to prove that an elderly person is not fit to manage such a valuable property." The threat was crystal clear. If I didn't hand over my house voluntarily, they would seek to have me declared mentally incompetent to take it from me legally. I watched them leave my house, heard the engine of their car fade away, and I was left alone in my devastated living room. The dirty party dishes were scattered on all the tables, the balloons were starting to deflate, and the smell of the cake had become nauseating. I collapsed onto my Italian leather sofa, and for the first time in 67 years of life, I cried as if the world had ended. Because, in a way, it had. The world where I had a son who loved me had died that afternoon. But as I cried, something else began to be born inside me. Something I had never felt before. A cold, calculating, relentless rage. If they wanted a war, they would get one. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat on my sofa, surrounded by the remnants of the party I had organized with so much love, feeling my world crumble piece by piece. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's look of contempt, heard Jessica's poisonous words. I relived the humiliation of being thrown on the floor while 30 people judged me in silence. At 3 a.m, I made a decision that would change everything. I got up, went to my room, pulled a suitcase from the closet, and began to pack. I wasn't going to stay in this house one more night, feeling like a prisoner in my own home, waiting for them to arrive with legal papers to strip me of everything. As I folded my clothes with trembling hands, I remembered my sister Carol's words from the week before. "Eleanor, if you ever need to escape from anything, my house is always open." I called a cab at 5 a.m. and left my house just as it was, with the dirty dishes, the deflated balloons, the half-eaten cake rotting on the table. Let David and Jessica see the result of their cruelty. Let them smell the decay of what they had destroyed. The drive to Carol's house on the coast took 2 hours. The entire way, my phone didn't stop ringing. David called 17 times, Jessica 5. The messages they left oscillated between false concern and veiled threats. "Mom, where are you? We're worried. Eleanor, we came back to your house and you're not here. This is very irresponsible of you. Mom, if you don't show up, we'll have to call the police." I turned off the phone when I arrived at my sister's house. Carol opened the door in her robe, her hair tousled and her face etched with worry. When she saw me standing on her doorstep with a suitcase and eyes swollen from crying, she didn't ask a single question. She just hugged me and murmured, "Come in, sister. You're safe here." Her house smelled of fresh coffee and sea salt. The windows looked out directly onto the ocean, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could fully breathe. I sat in her kitchen while she made breakfast, and slowly, my voice cracking with pain, I told her everything that had happened. Carol listened in silence, but I saw her expression harden with each detail. When I finished recounting the shove and the public humiliation, she slammed her fist on the table. "That bastard," she muttered through clenched teeth. "That son of a bitch dared to push you." "Carol." "He's my son," I whispered, though the words tasted like ash. "No." She looked at me with eyes full of determination. "A son doesn't do that. What you have is a stranger who shares your blood." I spent 3 days at my sister's house, sleeping for the first time in months without nightmares, waking up to the sound of the waves instead of the terror of facing another day of manipulation. But on the morning of the 4th day, Carol came into my room with a serious expression. "Eleanor, you need to see this," she said, handing me her tablet. On the screen was a Facebook post from Jessica. The photo showed her and David, embracing in front of my house, with smiles that chilled me to the bone. The caption read, "With heavy hearts, we're reporting that our beloved Eleanor is going through an emotional crisis and has disappeared from her home. We are very concerned for her mental well-being and ask for your prayers. We have had to temporarily move into her house to look after the property while we await news." The comments were worse. Dozens of people expressing their concern for my deteriorating mental state and congratulating David and Jessica for being so responsible and loving by taking care of my property in my absence. "They've already moved in," I murmured, feeling my heart break all over again. "Read the comments," Carol said in a somber voice. I scrolled down and found comments from the party guests. Each one told a distorted version of what had happened. Poor David, his mom became so aggressive. Eleanor was always so possessive. It's so sad when elderly parents become irrational about money. Jessica had orchestrated a perfect smear campaign. In less than a week, she had turned my disappearance into evidence of my mental incompetence. She had justified their occupation of my house, and she had gotten the entire community to see her as the victim of a problematic mother-in-law. Sister, Carol sat next to me and took my hands. I have something to tell you. I've been documenting everything you've told me about David and Jessica for the last few months. Documenting? I asked, confused. She pulled out a folder full of papers. Recordings of our phone calls, where you told me about their demands for money. Photos of the bruises you had after your family disagreements. Copies of the threatening messages you sent me. Why did you do that? Because I knew this was going to happen. Her eyes filled with tears. Because I've seen how they've been manipulating and abusing you for years, and I knew that eventually they would try to take everything from you. She showed me page after page of evidence she had been collecting without my knowledge. My sister, who had always seemed so carefree, had been building a legal case to protect me. Carol, I whispered, what are we going to do? She smiled for the first time in days, and there was something fierce in that smile. We're going to destroy them. On Monday morning, Carol took me to the most prestigious law firm in the city. Robert Evans, a lawyer specializing in family law and elder abuse cases, reviewed all the documentation my sister had compiled with an increasingly grim expression. Mrs. Miller, he said after examining the recordings, photographs, and messages, what your son and daughter-in-law have done constitutes several crimes: extortion, threats, domestic violence, and now illegal occupation of property. But he's my son, I murmured, the words catching in my throat. And that is precisely why it's more serious, Robert replied firmly. Familial abuse is one of the most cowardly crimes there, Island. We spent 3 hours planning our strategy. Robert had investigated Jessica and discovered information that left me frozen. She had a history of petty scams and had been married twice before, always to older men who owned valuable properties. David wasn't her first victim. He was her specialty. Your daughter-in-law is a professional con artist, Robert explained, showing me the documents, and she has been training your son to be her accomplice. That afternoon, we returned to Carol's house to find 18 missed calls from David. The voicemails ranged from false concern to direct threats. Mom, if you don't appear in 24 hours, we're going to report you as a missing person with mental health issues. Eleanor, your erratic behavior is forcing us to take legal action. But there was one message that shattered my soul. It was from my neighbor, Mrs. Peterson. Eleanor, dear, I don't know what to believe. David and Jessica have been telling the whole neighborhood that you had a psychotic episode and are wandering somewhere aimlessly. They've organized volunteer searches and are talking to doctors about having you committed when you turn up. I hope you're okay. They're going to try to have me committed, I said to Carol in horror, over my dead body. My sister replied with a determination I had never seen in her. Robert had been clear. We had to act fast before David and Jessica could formalize any legal proceedings against my mental capacity. The plan was simple but effective. On Wednesday morning, when they thought they had everything under control, we would serve them with a lawsuit for illegal occupation, extortion, and domestic violence. But I wanted something more. I wanted them to pay for every humiliation, every manipulation, every tear they had wrung from me. Robert, I told him on Tuesday night, I want you to arrange a meeting. Tell them I'm willing to negotiate. Are you sure? We could lose the element of surprise. Trust me, I replied, feeling something cold and calculating settle in my chest. I want to look them in the eyes when they realize they've lost. On Wednesday, at 10 in the morning, we met at Robert's office. David and Jessica arrived with their own lawyer, a young man who had clearly underestimated the situation. Jessica wore a cream-colored dress and pearls, playing the part of the concerned daughter-in-law to perfection. Mom. David stood up when I entered, feigning relief. We were so worried. Where have you been? Sit down, I replied in an icy voice, not returning his fake embrace. Eleanor, Jessica approached with fabricated tears. We've been so distressed. The house feels so empty without you. I'm sure it does, I replied, enjoying the confusion in her eyes at my coldness. Robert took control of the meeting immediately. We are here to discuss the immediate eviction from Mrs. Miller's property and the subsequent legal actions. Their lawyer, a Mr. Vega, laughed nervously. Eviction? Mr. Evans, I think there's a misunderstanding. My clients are caring for the property of a woman who is clearly going through a mental health crisis. A mental health crisis? Robert smiled like a predator. Interesting. Do you have any medical documentation to support that claim? Well, no, but... Vega began to stammer. Because we do have documentation. Robert placed the first folder on the table. Audio recordings where your clients threaten, extort, and emotionally blackmail my client. David's face turned pale. Those recordings were made without our consent. In this state, only one party's consent is required, Robert replied with a smile. And your mother consented to every recording. Jessica finally understood this was not a friendly negotiation. Eleanor, what are you doing? We're family. Family? My voice was laced with venom. Does family push a 67-year-old woman to the floor? Does family threaten to steal her house? I never said steal, David protested. Robert placed the second folder on the table. Here we have your wife's criminal record, Mr. Miller. 3 prior marriages, all to older property-owning men, all ending after she obtained valuable assets. The silence in the room was deafening. David looked at Jessica with growing horror. What is he talking about? David, honey, I'll explain later, Jessica murmured. But it was too late. Your wife is a professional con artist, I continued, savoring every word, and you are her perfect puppet. A con artist? David turned to Jessica, his eyes filled with horror. What are they talking about? Robert laid photographs on the table. Jessica at her previous wedding to a 70-year-old man. Property transfer documents. Police reports of minor scams. Each image was a stab to my son's heart as he began to understand the magnitude of his betrayal. Her first husband, Robert Clement, left her his $500,000 house before he died. Mysteriously, Robert explained in a clinical tone. Her second husband, Manuel Torres, transferred his family business to her name 3 months before she filed for divorce. The pattern is always the same. Seduce, manipulate, isolate the victim from their family, and finally strip them of everything. Jessica had gone completely pale, but still tried to maintain her facade. That's not true. David, honey, don't believe them. Is that why you pushed me away from my mom? David looked at her as if seeing a stranger. Is that why you always insisted she was selfish and possessive? Because she was. Jessica tried to stick to her story, but her voice trembled. Eleanor never accepted us as a family. I did accept you, I said, my voice cracking, feeling the tears threaten to return. I opened my home to you. I treated you like a daughter. I spent my savings on your happiness, and you repaid me by turning my own son against me. Robert continued, relentless. But here's the best part. Your daughter-in-law is not only a con artist, she's also a pathological liar. Has she told you, David, about her other 2 children? The world stopped. What other children? David murmured. Jessica has 2 children from previous marriages, who live with their grandparents because she abandoned them when they were no longer useful for her scams. Robert displayed more documents. And there's something else interesting. She was never pregnant during your marriage, but she lost the baby last year. David looked like he was in shock. She was devastated for months. Psychological pregnancy, or simply a lie, Robert replied. The medical records we have indicate she was never pregnant. David turned to Jessica with a look I had never seen in his eyes. Pure contempt. You lied about the baby? David, I can explain everything. Jessica began to cry. But these tears were different, desperate, real. I love you. Everything I did was for our future. Our future? David stood up abruptly. Or your next con? In that moment, I understood something terrible. My son had been as much a victim as I was. Jessica had systematically destroyed our relationship, turning him into her weapon against me. But the difference was, he had chosen to believe her. He had chosen to push me. He had chosen to humiliate me. David, I said softly, I know she manipulated you, but you chose to push me. You chose to threaten me. You chose to humiliate me in front of 30 people. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. Mom, I didn't know. You knew you were hurting me, I interrupted, and you chose to do it anyway. Robert placed the final documents on the table. Mrs. Miller, here is an immediate eviction order. You have 24 hours to vacate the property. Any attempt to return will be considered trespassing. And here, he added, handing her another paper, is a restraining order. You cannot come within 500 yards of my client. Jessica finally exploded. This is ridiculous. That house should be mine. I deserve it after everything I've put up with in this dysfunctional family. Her words were a gift. Robert smiled and pointed to a small recorder on the table. Thank you for that final confession, Mrs. Miller. Their lawyer, Mr. Vega, stood up hastily. My clients will make no further statements. This meeting is over. But I wasn't finished. I stood up slowly, looking my son in the eyes one last time. David, you were the light of my life for 42 years. I raised you alone, worked 2 jobs to give you everything. I sacrificed my youth for your happiness. And when I finally needed you to defend me, you chose to push me to the floor. Mom, please. He tried to approach, but I stopped him with a look. Number. My voice was as firm as steel. Some things can't be fixed. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. I hope she was worth it, Jessica, because she cost a mother her son. I walked out of that office with my head held high, leaving behind 42 years of maternal love and embracing something new. My freedom. 6 months later, I sold my house for $950,000. I bought a small condo by the sea, next to Carol, and with the remaining money, I started traveling the world. Paris, Rome, Tokyo, cities I had always dreamed of seeing but had sacrificed for motherhood. I started a blog called My Life Begins at 67, where I share my story and help other older women facing family abuse. Thousands of women write to me, telling me their own stories of manipulative sons and toxic daughters-in-law. David tried to contact me several times after his divorce from Jessica, but I never answered. Some wounds are too deep to heal, and some choices have permanent consequences. Today, as I write this from a terrace in Santorini, watching the most beautiful sunset I have ever witnessed, I can say something I never thought I would say. I am happy, truly happy. Free from the toxicity, free from the manipulation, free from sacrificing my well-being for people who didn't value it. Sometimes the greatest love we can give ourselves is to walk away from those who hurt us, even if they share our blood. I learned that family isn't always found in blood ties, but in those who love, respect, and protect us. And at 67 years old, I finally learned to be selfish in the right way by putting my own well-being first.